Hello and welcome to another episode of 10x Marketer podcast. Today we have Sarah Stemen with us. She is a well-known figure in the PPC space. She has a great personal brand, and more than personal brand, she has a great network of friends who was able to help her when she really needed it, be her next job switch after a long sabbatical, be her starting her own business after being in the PP space for more than 15 years. The network was always there to support her in the next move. This story that Sarah shared and the learnings that she shared with me, there are definitely some great key takeaways that all of you can take with you and apply to your personal brand. Before we jump into the conversation and talk to Sarah, make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow the 10x Marketer podcast on your favorite channels. We are available on Spotify, we are available on YouTube, we are available on Apple Podcast. I look forward to have you as my listeners. Make sure you also share this with your friends and family members who want to grow as marketers, because we invite great marketers to share their stories. Now, before wasting more time, let's get into the conversation and listen to the story that Sarah has to share with us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. So, my name's Sarah Stemen, and I own my own business, Sarah Stemen LLC, really original there. I am a paid search marketer, but I have been doing marketing for, man, since 2007. So, forever.
Yeah, awesome. So in 2007 is when you started working on the personal brand that we call today. Started exploring LinkedIn as a professional network. So why don't you start with your starting story? How actually you got into LinkedIn and what made you build what you have built today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the original goal, because as we had kind of talked about a little bit earlier, personal branding wasn't a thing. So what it was my husband works in IT, and I was like, man, this dude never has to send out his resume, and jobs just are coming to him and landing in his lap. Now, he does not have a big personal brand and never did, but I did notice that LinkedIn was really that professional network. So I had an MBA professor, and my MBA professor had this huge LinkedIn following. And his approach was just to send connection requests to anyone and everyone and accept, those requests back. And he was a CMO. So I had the CMO in my life that was willing and open and bragging about his LinkedIn following, although it wasn't a following at the time, it was the connections. And so I just started following what he did, and just I would send requests to anyone and everyone with no shame. And I built my network, pretty quickly doing that.
That's awesome, Sarah. And so, initial phase, even for me, the LinkedIn experience was more on sending connection requests.
Yes.
And to be very frank, right now I'm approaching people to like appear on my podcast. And one of the thing that I hit as a roadblock is many people are not so accepting the connection request right now, because there is that follow button where
Correct.
people expect you to follow them rather than sending a connection request. And uh, things are different than what it was 2017. So I think 2015 was your kind of a pivotal year where you started focusing more on the building the personal brand. You started working on Twitter also. So what really changed from 2007? How was the journey in the initial years, and then when really you feel that yes, now it has picked up? When was the first feeling?
Yeah, no, those are all good questions. So 2007 is actually when I started my Twitter account, because that's when I started in, what we called digital marketing at the time, which I feel like that word has been tainted at this point, unfortunately, by like these MLM, whatever it is, what it is. But that's when I started. And so at that time, it was you have to join Twitter. Instagram hadn't even been invented at this point. College students could still be the only ones on Facebook. So it was just a time when we were playing with all these new tools and what was happening. So I joined Twitter then, and I wasn't really big on it, but I was in just like exponential learning place. And so at the time we had hashtags. So we had like Columbuser, which was the Columbus, Ohio group. So I had that. We actually live tweeted when I was in labor with my son in 2009. So that was with my coworkers. We all just used it, but we were these new, fresh, young marketers. So that's when Twitter started. So then fast forward to, I guess it would have been 2015, like you said, that marker. And at the time, so I always say every one of my career like moves was every time I had a child, right? So 2009, my son was born. I went part time. 2015 or 2014, I had a daughter. That's when I left the corporate world and went sort of freelance. And then 2000, it's like 2015, 2016, I joined Hannapin. And what I saw there was they had that PPC Hero blog. So I was able to really start blogging. And then I came back to Twitter as a place to start essentially promoting my blog because I wanted the blog posts that I wrote to be seen. And so it was really like out of self-interest at that time to get more views on my blog posts and not really for building that personal network still. But by sharing content, I was building a network. So it was all really by accident and using the tool, not by design or with any intent, just being there, if that makes sense.
Awesome, Sarah. So that's a wonderful start. And I think we are building a great podcast today. And your personal story has to be really inspiring. What really I want to understand more is like I asked you that question in the earlier, but I would again ask as a follow up question. When was the time that you really felt that yes, now my personal brand is picking up, I'm getting the kind of response I expected from the network? Was there a realization, or there was no metrics to track that kind of feeling? Or
So interestingly, I've never, and especially if you look at some of these like influencer lists, my following has never actually been huge. So if you look on paper, I don't actually have that many Twitter followers. I'm like crawling and begging to get 5,000 in on LinkedIn right now. But my relationships with my followers are very, very deep. And so I think there have been two distinct times when I was like, oh my gosh, I have a personal brand. And I would say it's sometimes when other people say, oh my gosh, you don't realize how big your brand is. And then I'm like, oh, wow. Because to me, it was never about really building the brand. It was about being genuine and making the connections. And so I think still to this day, there wasn't like a moment, but there's like little moments. And then the biggest feedback that I get from people is, I love your content. And what I understand from being told, I love your content, what they're really saying is you're putting information into chunks that we can digest. And so that also means that I have a big brand. So it's always this little feedback mechanism. And then I would also say, I mean, money. Like in 3 months, which I didn't realize was that big of a deal, right? Until this happened, I built my business from zero to $15,000 a month. And that's just still like, oh my gosh, I did that. But I did that because of the network that I had. So financially, I was able to see that gain, but then I was getting that little feedback from my relationships along the way.
uh, okay, that's an interesting and awesome point here, Sarah. What really, when people think of personal brand, these followership and like these are the big numbers that we want to talk about. Like you have these many followers, that means you are a bigger personal brand. What really you brought in is how can you build that deeper connection with whatever number of followers you have. I think that is even more important than having the bigger numbers. And since you talked about building a $15,000 business, and without, I'm sure you are not putting ad for your own
No.
marketing, so that's a huge like benefit. So as a marketer, as a PPC marketer, you know, right, how much you end up putting in Google ads, maybe for other businesses, or maybe face meta ads. But if we are saving that money, that's direct contribution of that personal brand you build for yourself, right? That's a huge contribution. And I think the important point here is that you have to build that engagement, you have to build that
Yes.
connection rather than following focusing more on the number. So number is not important. who are those people and how deeper they are connected to you is even more important than the numbers. That's the message I'm getting right now. So the next thing that I have in mind is that you took a 6 year sabbatical or a break
Yes.
to
Yes.
be a full-time mother, and then you came back, and during our initial chat when we were trying to build the podcast, you shared something like, when I came back, my network accepted me with open arms, something like that. So maybe you can share more, like, were you doing some warm up before you started looking for job again? What was the kind of response you got initially? Were people surprised, like, where you were for 6 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you can talk more about how was the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, so what was interesting? So I remember my very original goal was to never have to look for a job ever, right? So I have never put my resume out for any job that I've taken in over 15 years. So I was recruited to come to Hannibin. I was recruited to come to the next job. I actually found that through a friend who needed somebody for paid search and came to me. And then the job after that, the agency job before I went out on my own, a recruiter found me as well. So that was the original goal. So when I came back after 6 years, it was through somebody that knew I do paid search and had reached out. And so I didn't have to go through that looking for a job phase. In fact, I wasn't actually even planning to go back to work because when I had left work the first time, and I think I'm going to incorporate a little bit of just the motherhood aspect into this. So when I left, felt like I had sort of lost my edge, if that makes sense. Like I felt like I had brain fog. I wasn't able to think through problems the same way. I was losing my fire. But what I now know what it was I think my body and my hormones were protecting that baby. I was nursing at the time. I think my brain just didn't have that ability to focus like it did prior to having my child. And so it just was really clear to me that this wasn't my passion anymore. And so when I came back, it I just felt a renewed energy and a different type of energy because having children makes you mature in different ways as a person. I had taken on all these hobbies, and so now it was like my work became my hobby again, but in a healthy way. And so that is when I really saw my network building in a different way. And so let's rewind to when I was at Hannibin working on the PPC Hero blog. I had been sitting in a conference room with Matt Umbro, who also had a big personal brand and still does. He was the inventor of PPC Chat before Julie took over. So Matt told me, if you want to build your personal brand, just start participating in PPC Chat. But as somebody who maybe was less mature and didn't realize, I never really took the time to participate actively. It was kind of here and there, like every couple months I might participate. But when I came back, I made it on my calendar. I put it on my calendar to participate. And I participated not only on the Tuesday chat, but I participated in the Thursday phone call. And so I got on a phone call probably my first week back. And I remember Jeannie was on it, Kirk was on it, Julie. It was a good, lively conversation. And I took the time to speak and said, I'm coming back and I'm loving this. We're in the age of automation. And then I asked a question about how Google used to be like just a really good bed for testing. And then Jeannie kind of brought me up to speed. And she's like, well, it's a great time to come back because were those tests ever really tests? And she kind of challenged that belief. And it was this great conversation. And then there I was. So I felt like I was welcomed with open arms by this community. But then, in 6 years, there's a lot of other changes. One of the other big ones is when I left the workforce, us older people, so to speak, and a lot of are retired, we would pick up the phone and talk. Whereas the conversations now at work tend to be through DMs because there's a younger generation that's there in 6 years. And I'm one of the old ones. And so I started using Twitter as like the way to DM people and just laugh about, like I told you, PPC jokes. And so I was building this network without like any intent, just looking for kind of friends because I'm a mom, I'm busy, I don't have the friendships that I used to have where we'd go out, and the community became my group of friends. So deep
Great. So,
relationships.
yeah, this is so great. Now, one question which is
Yes.
slightly off the topic and
Yes.
bring me back if it is completely out of the podcast flow that we have. Uh, when you looked at the Google Ad dashboard after 6 years,
Yes.
how much difference was there? Were you able to recognize, is this the same tool I used to work when I left?
So that's a great question that I feel like nobody has ever asked. I could definitely leave this in. So I open it up, and the first thing is all my columns have changed. And all of a sudden, instead of having like impressions, click the rate, I have engagement rate, and I was like, oh my God, I have to learn new metrics. Now I now know you just get rid of those. Those are not like a thing, and they kind of are. That's a much deeper conversation. But yeah, I do remember having a bit of a panic attack when I very first opened it, but it became like riding a bike where I started navigating around. And in fact, one time after I had started, probably a month or so after, I was on the phone with the CEO of our company, and she was watching how I navigated, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you just jump around here like crazy. You just know." And I also would say everything that I felt maybe in 2015 like I wasn't good enough, I was now a rock star because I had all this context. So I could come back to people that had been in the industry not very long and say, "Do you understand why Tag Manager was invented? Well, let me tell you what it's like going through a development life cycle at a big company like Nationwide and trying to get tags in. If you do not plan those won't go in for a year and a half." And so this is a container, an actual container where you put the marketing tags. And so I felt like I had just all this power again when I was like reading books and playing with my kids for 6 years.
Awesome. So, one thing that you talked about is like started participating in the PPC chat
Yes.
very often, and then the community engagement that you built up after 2015. Uh, like, is there a process that you followed? Like, one thing you talked about is adding it to your calendar. That is
Yes.
definitely there. Now, everyone who wants to build a personal brand, like people like you and me, they have a very busy schedule.
Yeah.
So sometime it goes in the backdrop. Like you
Yeah.
don't really work on it till the time you need it, and when you need it, it is not there because you have never worked on it. So, what are the minimums, or maybe if you want to put it in a structure, like this is how it should be done, or is there no structure at all? You have to follow your guts.
Yeah. So for me, I will say I didn't have a structure, but looking back, especially because I'm in a position now to be able to teach people sort of, which feels weird to teach people how to be authentic and build a personal brand. But if I have to go back and dissect it, I was doing things intuitively. Like I said, put it on the calendar. So I put PPC chat on the calendar and made sure to show up there. And then I would also add like just being really like genuine and understanding. And I was talking to my husband about this because he hates it when I talk about him, by the way. So I'm not going to give a lot of detail, but he works in corporate America, and he internally has to sometimes build his brand. And so I explained that I actually, like, he told me he's shy to share his content because he feels like he's saying the same things other people are saying. And I said, actually, say the exact same things that people are saying. That's okay, but say it with your own voice. Because I realized in who I was engaging with, I would start engaging with them because I would look at them and think, like, I could have written that, but I would still really read their content. And what it was by understanding how they were saying it, I could be that much more valuable to my coworkers and to my clients because they maybe had a different anecdote or a different way of saying it. And so it's recognizing that you have a voice and that I could follow 10,000 paid search managers, which I do, and that's okay because their unique way of saying things adds value to my life and theirs. And so then engaging with that basic content. Like it doesn't have to be a new idea. How many times do I need to tell people that, your click through rate sometimes might be lower, and that might mean that you're getting the right customers, not the wrong customers, especially in B2B. Like that is a simple concept, but because it's my voice and I articulate it a certain way, I might attract a certain client that maybe is different than Jill's or Boris's or Julie's. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, obviously it makes sense, and I think that is very important. With your voice, you cannot connect with everyone. There may be certain people who would connect with you, certain people who won't connect with you with because you have been that. And I think one of the important aspect of a great brand or a personal brand is that you have to have that stand. You have to be that polarizing figure where some people may not like you, but there may be some people who would just love you, do anything for you. So that's an important aspect of building a good brand. Now, another aspect which you talked about is like, maybe this is the question most people have. You cannot come up with new content every day, right?
Right.
It is more important to understand is that you can only bring new perspective. You cannot bring
Yes.
new concept. It is already there in the world. You cannot
Yes.
reinvent Google ads. It's done by Google. You can only bring your perspective, and that is what unique about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So focus on that rather than focusing on the content, like, am I unique, am I adding something additional, am I being different, will people like me or not? People would like you to for being authentic. If
Yeah.
you are authentic, then obviously people would for sure like you. Some of them may not, but that's okay. They have their different perspective, they can go the other side, but there may be people who are able to connect with you. Then the other important aspect, I think we talked about this, that you built a $15,000 business and it's all through referrals and through personal brand. One thing that you shared initially when we were talking about is that you don't have to put your financial gains upfront. Like you don't have to
Right.
have that in the agenda. You have to be that nice and authentic person. Like, when should that financial gain really come in? Because ultimately everyone's objective is that you want to build business for yourself, you want to be the provider for your family, but you also want to be authentic. You just don't want to say that give me money, right? That's not the objective. Now, when do you really bring in that part? Like,
Yeah.
when do you
Yeah.
really start tracking whether this effort that I'm putting in, obviously people would have to take time from their busy schedule. When do you
Yeah.
really start tracking that yes, the effort that I'm putting in this direction had started giving me some output? So is it some timeline that you put to it? When do you really start realizing that yes, now we are going in the direction that I needed it to go?
Yeah. So my brand, it was, I never did it for the money, but the money happened faster than maybe it should have. But I learned that again through that network and other people because they'd say, like, oh my gosh, you grew so fast. I didn't even know that I was growing fast because that wasn't the idea. And I think for me, and this has been what I would call maybe a fault, but it's also a benefit, is I'm the type of person who'll get on the phone with someone and talk to them for forever without even charging them. And it's like almost a disconnect. So I think realizing that I'm entitled to make money and then, just kind of working on myself enabled me to convert some of those conversations into paying clients. I also think I had mentioned I never say no to a podcast. So I've had business come through from podcasts, be that one that I've done in the industry, not even on my own sort of personal brand ownership. I would say things like this, where I'll have a really good conversation with a podcast host, and then somebody will walk in that says, "Hey, I need a Google Ads coach," and they'll call me. Um, and I actually find that I think I got three separate clients from being a podcast guest because the conversations are so good. And then also, and I'm sure you know this as being somebody, a host of a podcast,
Yeah.
actually very hard to get people to show up. And so I learned that some big companies use their podcast as an interview tactic, because if they can get somebody to show up and talk with them and be genuine and be recorded and do all these amazing things, they're like, man, this would be a good partner for me. So
So
I've learned certain things like that. There's just a lot to it, but the root of all of it is just being like a really, really good person with really good integrity, and then not directly chasing the money. Like that's always a secondary thing. And I guess I'll tie this concept back, and you'll probably laugh at this, to dating. So I remember when I was like, before I was married, my dad, I had just gone through a breakup, and my dad was like, you never look for the boyfriend, you look for friends. And then those friends introduce you to the boyfriend. And I feel like business is similar. You never look for the business. That's really annoying to people, but you always just look for friends. And then business happens as a result of that.
so then you also have to look for the right friends, because that's also important,
Yeah,
both
yeah,
case
yeah,
of dating and business. Like,
yeah,
they can give you the direction that you need.
yeah.
Now the other important aspect, Sarah, is of course we talked about how to like how much time you have to put in. You have discussed that. We also discussed the financial gains, how to really put into the perspective. Then some other tangible results, like other than the money and network, are there any other benefits of having a good personal brand? Was there any situation where your personal network on LinkedIn or Twitter was able to help you outside the regular like work framework, where you really needed help in case of an emergency situations, and that really worked for you? Are there any examples like that you want to share?
So I would say a lot of it for me, and I would say I feel bad that I'm not focusing on like, I mean, followers. I'm really focusing on like, I just have people in my life that I really care about. Like, and I know I mentioned a couple people on here already, you know, that you should certainly invite to the podcast, right? So like
Yeah.
Julie, like these are not, like we were saying the other day, and Nava, of course, which I know you've talked about. Like these have become not just my professional network, but truly my friends. And that has kept me on days that are hard, because obviously I'm a business owner. Those have kept me doing the do, right? Continuing to put myself out there. So I do feel like I have this community of supporters around me that I would go hang out with them and have dinner with them, even if I weren't in paid search. And that's just such a phenomenal place to be in your life. So that I would say, aside from financial, that deepness of the relationship. And it's kind of one of those things, you know, when you know, right? You know, when you know, I have solid friends around me. And then I would say, just also, this would be another metric. It's a funny metric though. The number of spam and like kind of people seeking you, you know, so like I started to get little things like people would apply for jobs. And this is before I actually got all the money and had clients. People were like, man, you're so successful. They'd start applying for jobs with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no business. But from the outside, I looked like I was so successful. So I would say I had things like that. And then, like, you do get a lot of, I don't even know if it's opportunists, but it's just a lot of like spam in your inbox.
Yeah, so when people see you more, they spam you more.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Or
simple
some like,
concept.
I don't
Yeah,
like troll comments too, you know, it's stuff like that.
true. So especially, I mean, I remember especially during the COVID situations, people just came forward, and whosoever was connected to whomever, like lot of help was possible and provided, and I really appreciate the help that I got from the network that I built so far
Yeah,
during those COVID situations when we were looking for oxygen cylinders and everything
yes,
else, medical supplies. So definitely, it's a good to have like connected from people all over the world, and you don't know where you actually need help, and maybe
exactly.
somebody will come to your rescue. So it's very important. Now the other aspect, which is we talked about, I think almost everything. Now the other aspect, or the important aspect, is what you really share with your network on regular basis. You talked about sharing the PPC jokes, which is also
Yeah.
a humorous way of connecting with your network. But other than, let's say, the humorous content, how do you really build a calendar? So I think when it comes to sharing on LinkedIn or any other platform, you also talked about your husband being shy or
Yeah.
being that in a discomfort situation, and this happens to almost everyone who is not a regular content creator. So I think there's a phase where you become a content creator. You have that mindset where you everything is content for you. Like you
Yes.
look at a post and you always see that yes, there's some content for me here. Now that mindset takes time. It's not
Yes.
immediate. How do people initially build up or come up from that comfort zone where they can openly share without having that fear of being judgment or like being judged, and really share some authentic content? How do you really come up with the initial content? Now there are AI tools, chat gpts and all, and I think that's the another side effect, like everyone is sharing the same thing. But how do you really come up with the initial content plan or calendar for you to build a brand for yourself?
So I learned actually, and this is through literally, I always say you have to go through the woods. You have to just do it, right? Like it is going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel cringe. It's going to feel weird. You just have to go through it. I would say a safe way to go through it is just start commenting. I've met fantastic people who are just always in the comment fields, especially now when the AI is just rampant. Like the next time I see an AI, I just want to be like, do you get comfort out of putting AI in here? Because this is not good for you. This is not good for me. This is not working. So at a time right now in 2024, when more and more people are craving genuine, be in the comments if you're afraid to post yourself. So then when it comes to like really, really posting like genuinely for yourself, I find like they call it not passively scrolling, but like scrolling with your brain on, and then finding a post. I mean, why do I like this post? What is attracting me to this post? And this post has to be and should be outside of your industry. So like for me, and I told somebody the secret, so I guess I'll tell you, I really actually like therapy posts. So like, are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling burned out? Because, you know, having my own business, I come from a place where I was very burned out. So I find a post like that, and then I'm like, how do I apply this to paid search? You know, so like if I look at a post, and now everyone's gonna know the secret of my content, you know, so like I did one the other day, like what is a what does a poor performing paid search account look like? That was inspired by what does burnout look like? Because a lot of my ideal client, they might not know their account isn't performing. They might not know that it's losing $26,000, which I saw this year, an account losing 26,000. They had no clue. What does that look like to them? How are they experiencing that problem? And so really articulating that for your audience. And then also I would say, like, once you do this every single day, you start to learn like what gets engagement, what gets business, right? You have to have what gets business. And then, you know, what is sort of just fun to post and get, I don't know. They're just, you just kind of, you learn to just not care. And then you learn to just, and I would say this happened when I started my own business, like be yourself. Like, so like things that I did not like about myself, like I am a terrible speller. I actually don't love process. The way I look at a problem isn't a step by step. I tend to circle a problem over and over again and like go through it. Uh, there's certain things, so just leaning into who I am versus what I do. So you just start to grow more and more. Does that hopefully answer that?
Yes, yes, that answers that, and that's a perfect answer, Sarah. Now, we are almost at the end of the podcast, and if you have anything else to share, you're more than free to share that. But before we come to the concluding statement, I would ask a very specific question. That
Yeah.
is, what would be the specific advice, not the generic advice, specific advice to people like me who have just started posting content, just started building their focus on the personal brand? What would be your, like, say, three-step advice or two-step, very, very specific advice to them?
So be you, lean into who you are so much. The It's like the who you were as a kid, the everything you were trained to not be, that's what you need to be online. Society taught us by schooling, by being good at our jobs, to be a certain way, to be this box. That's the opposite of what you want to be online. So the person who puts their foot in their mouth, who has a different opinion, be that person and have fun with it. And if people don't like you, they don't like you. But you know what? You're going to find an audience that absolutely loves you. So just be you.
Yeah, that's exactly what we talked about. There may be certain people who don't like you, but that's okay. They can
Yeah.
find somebody
Yeah.
else they
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. I mean,
And
try
you
doing
find,
business with someone who doesn't like you.
yeah,
When you
yeah, it's
put up a fake image of yourself and then that's the client that you bring on, good luck. Right?
true. Because at the end of the day, you have to be yourself someday, and that's the
Right.
day you lose that client.
Yeah, that's when the client is like, Sarah, you don't know how to spell. And I'm like, did you see that I knew how to spell when you came to me? Like, that's an open thing. It's okay.
Great. So, any concluding statement, remark you want to make before we close this?
Well, thank you for having me and letting me talk about my personal brand because it's not something that I talk about because on paper, it's not like she has, 50,000 followers. I'm just a person who has enjoyed the community.
Yeah, so it's better to have 5,000 friends than 50,000 followers. Maybe that's the
That's
way you
great.
put it. Thank you so much for joining, Sarah, and thank you guys for listening this so far. I think you just enjoyed the conversation, and it's so good to have Sarah here and share her personal branding story. If you have not followed the 10x Marketer podcast so far, I request you to follow it on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, wherever you're listening from. And do share our podcast with your friends and family members who can benefit from the conversation like this. Thank you so much for joining and have a great day ahead. Thank you once again, Sarah. It was lovely talking to you.
Yeah, likewise.